So we're fortunate to have back all three of our panelists that led such a great conversation last week. Shawn Dunwoody is coming into the house, I understand. And today we're going to go similarly to the format that we used last time. If you have questions, please enter them into the question and answer box in the center of the bottom of the Zoom screen. We will be keeping our chat open, and as we did last time, we want to see who's here, so please put your name in and where you're from so that we know who's in the Zoom room. And so we will be looking at those and trying to answer them, but please put your questions in the regular question box. This program is a joint presentation with the Center City Community Coalition, C4, and the Community Design Center of Rochester. Both of our organizations are working together to build a more vibrant and equitable city. We had such great feedback from the last program, and we learned that many of you have quite an interest in this placemaking topic and want to know more, that you liked the format that we offered last time, so we're going to be continuing to do that in the future, and that you also want the opportunity to have these community conversations. So we're here today to see how we can make that work for you guys. We appreciate you being back. We have our speakers up on the panel before us, and we've got Maria back from the Community Design Center, Arian Horbovets from the Urban Phoenix, and Shawn Dunwoody, who should be joining us here shortly. All right, what we heard loud and clear from the last sessions were that placemaking is all about the people. And I think that came through from all three of our panelists. And we wanted to know, and people wanted to know how people can be better engaged in the whole placemaking process. And how does somebody to get involved? Do they go to zoning meetings, council attendance? Do they, do they attend these meetings? And I think there's a lot of good guidance that we can give them, Maria. So do you want to start with that, and then we can kind of move it around to have other contributions?
Thanks everyone for coming. It's great to have you take time out of your day to join us for this session. I think you all know the Community Design Center is one of the resources that exists in our community to help facilitate community engagement. And so certainly we try to share as much information through the community about projects and strategies that we can implement. Certainly there are many, many other wonderful community organizations that are working. We all have areas of expertise, but there are also many, many areas where we overlap. And so depending on your interest, following those organizations as well. And neighborhood organization is critically important for the dissemination of information. So if there is a neighborhood group, a neighborhood organization where you live, certainly they would be the great vehicle for being able to share information about upcoming projects that are going to be impacting your community. Certainly going to the city's website or your community's municipal page is a great way to be informed. But as much as possible, just being able to be aware of the different projects is a great starting point.
Great, Maria. Okay, one of the things, knowing that placemaking is all about people, we had a question about how cities, what creates an urban environment? How many people have to live in an environment to make a city that would be appropriate for placemaking? And I know, Arian, that's your forte there. So why don't you take that one?
Yeah, I think the misnomer is that a city has to be or an urban environment has to be a certain population within a certain square mile radius. I don't think that's the case at all. Whether you're talking about something as big as New York City or a city as small as Geneva, when we're talking about urbanism, when we're talking about placemaking, I think we're talking more about a mindset, right? We want to prioritize density. We want to prioritize, walkability. We want to prioritize smart and safe street design that prioritizes people, bikes, public transportation. We want people to be able to access jobs, resources, and entertainment in a very small space so that people can make a choice to leave their car at home or go car free, just to create a more human scale environment, no matter how big the city is. So a city like New York City has elements of mixed use development and walkability and everything like that, but so does a small city, like I said, like Geneva, or even what we typically consider a suburban community like Pittsford or Fairport. The point is, every community, no matter how big or small, can, with the right mindset, can incorporate the elements that make a great place, great urban design and development. They can implement those into their environment to maximize whatever built environment that they have, no matter how big or small they are. So it's about mindset. The built environment that comes out as a result is kind of the byproduct. So I like to think of it more, like you said, as people are looking for a more natural and connective urban environment, no matter how big or small, what you see resulting in the new urbanistic kind of movement is the result of that.
I'd like to say specifically, because we use the word urban a lot, and then we get a lot of feedback about, well, we're not urban, we're a small hamlet in Rush. And I specifically like to use the term urban anywhere we want to refer to a place that has a density, a cluster of density, and mixed use. So that combination of not being a community that is only one thing, it's only a suburban development, it's only a residential community, or it's only a commercial area, as so many of our large downtowns of our cities have been. It's hard for any place to survive if it's only one thing. So this kind of leads into the whole conversation about diversity of use and typology and all of those things. But urban is not only about cities.
That's great. Oh, looks like Shawn Dunwoody is entering the house. Thank you for joining the house, Shawn.
All right, great. Sorry for the delay. So, all
right. No problem. So we are just working our way through some questions, and we did have a question presented in the chat or in our question box, and it's from Susan, who's asking, services such as grocery stores and drugstores are very lacking in the area. What plans or incentives are being looked into? You want to take that one about what the process might be to have that come on somebody's radar screen?
The area, what area are you speaking of? I'm sorry.
I'm not sure because she didn't specify, but let's say that we're looking at the Inner Loop North area and maybe some of the economic development concepts that you've been talking to folks about. Mm-hmm. Oh, she just replied, Inner Loop area.
All righty.
Thanks, Susan.
Okay, and the question was what is about how do we actually create places for persons, for shops, and repeat the question once again, I'm sorry.
Okay, her question is, services such as grocery stores and drugstores are very lacking in the Inner Loop area. What plans or incentives might be looked into?
I would say at this stage, I wouldn't have a solid answer on what that actually is. It's still in the preliminary stages of development, but I think we actually know those things are needed. And some of the things we've actually looked at as far as Hinge and actually connecting with folks, it was the transit service. We actually sat down with them figuring out how to develop new access points along this Inner Loop North fill. We've actually sat down with physicians in the medical field, in particular U of R, University of Rochester, and Strong Hospital, and as to how do we create services for folks so that way the travel isn't as long or as distant to take care of health, because we realize that the economic growth of a community is important, but also the health and well-being of a community is important. So if you can have preventative measures and places and institutions in place that people can have easy access to, it kind of helps with some of the urban health issues that people tend to face. So I couldn't answer that question fully, but I'll say it is on the table to actually look at how do you develop a network or a system of travel, health, and economic development on the Interloop North.
And we just had a comment come in from Suzanne, who is your co-Hinge founder, and she's reminding us that there's a Caribbean grocery that just opened up on East Main Street in the midst of this COVID crisis, actually, which happens to be about a block from my house. And you know, when it opened, I thought, hey, we're starting to look like New York City, having these little corner stores that actually have fresh produce and offer some of the staples that our community needs without the, you know, I've been missing Hearts, you know, because that was here, and you know, that was maybe a little bit of too big an economic lift for to be supported. But how do you think something like this Caribbean grocery that's opened up is answering some of that community need?
I think it does work out well. We also have to look at there are a lot of corner stores that do supply food for people in the neighborhood. It may not be the most nutritious and healthiest foods, so maybe Arts is actually looking at how do we develop a stream or connection to help support some of these smaller corner stores so that people do have access to fresh groceries. And I know there was a pilot program that worked to do that. FoodLink did work on this several years ago because they were doing it on the store I was actually painting for the Fruit Belt project. So they were actually trying to distribute fresh produce on J and Grape Street. It had its kinks, but some folks did come in and purchase the fresh onions or tomatoes, but it takes some time to get accustomed to. So people weren't really thinking about going to the corner store for fresh produce. So I think with the market that's downtown now, I think that's a new introducing it, where it actually comes from the folks who are there hanging out in front of it to tell people, hey, hey, I saw it the other day and I was like, hey, they got fruit outside. I love that. They got vegetables outside. Nobody does it. I love it. It really draws the attention and the eye, and I think it'll get people used to that sort of that street feel. And I think that's what we're going to begin to see is people being able to place what is inside their store on the outside. I've seen people post pictures of stores actually taking pictures of what's on the shelves so people know what's actually there. So they know where they're going, so they don't have to wander around looking for products. So I think we may see post COVID, we may see a lot more of street produce, street merchandise out on the sidewalks, which would then lead to some wider design in the sidewalks because you want to limit the amount of people in one confined space. So I just danced around a lot of things there. But
well, and I'm just looking at that great background behind you, and I've been watching how you've been posting throughout the city, all the reminders about stay 6 feet apart or go be 6 feet under, and you just put one up in our neighborhood, which is great. But that whole role, do you want to address how the role that art and kind of visual elements can make stores more attractive, or can really contribute to the placemaking effort?
I think that really does. I think that really does enhance an environment or a community. I like to talk about one of my favorite strips or favorite neighborhoods that functions so well, but yet it has such a terrible reputation for some people. And that would be Clinton Avenue. Clinton Avenue has a vibrancy that you just, I was out there just on the warm day. I was doing my campaign, of protecting your circle. So I was on the corner of Clinton and Clifford for quite some time. But there's such a vibrancy there. That's actually a functioning community. Whereas you look, you have employment that exists from Coca-Cola to Hickey Freeman. You have furniture stores on the strip. You have a police station. You have a grocery store. You have a medical facility that's on the street. You have one of the most beautiful churches in the city of Rochester, St. Michael's. I think when we look at when we start to think about planning or developing, I think that's really a neighborhood to look at. Of course, we got some issues with poverty that's happening and a lot of stuff going on down there, but if you look at how that functions, that's actually a strip where people don't actually have to leave the neighborhood. They even got a clothing store where you can go and shop for clothes. So there's a lot of things that are, and you get your sneakers. You can do a lot of things on Clinton Avenue. I think we, because of whatever we hear on the media or the news, we're not looking at how that structure works. And I think we could see that sort of mirrored and adopted and changed in different levels in Loop North. Just looking at how that functions, how that actually functions. There's always somebody out on Clinton. There's always something going on. But I think beautification going into that, if you look at along the strip, you've got some great murals that are created by the FOR crew. A lot of the buildings themselves are brightly painted, and it looks great, like Uptown Express, or you've got these vibrancies that comes with the culture. So if you even look at the Caribbean market that's in your neighborhood, on the outside, it's like a bright lime green. It's bringing that culture to the community. So that actually makes it feel connected and lived in. So I think that gives that sense of vibrancy and color and life to a neighborhood. And a lot of times we build brown, so everything's just brown around us. But if we think about splashes of color and pops that are attractive, it can actually make our urban environments great. I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. And Marie, I know that's something that you're very involved with. Do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. One of the things that one of the first things that we do when we're working with a neighborhood or community is we want to take an inventory of what's already there. What are the things that exist in the community that are working? What are the things that are missing? And then with that, through the community, help them identify what are the things that they want to see in their community, so that the kinds of businesses, you could create programs or policies that will encourage the kinds of businesses that could be supported by the neighborhood and the community. So often we see not enough diversity of products and services available in the neighborhood. So that's one way to start, is by identifying exactly what the community needs and would support, and then finding the right formula for allowing that to happen, or inspiring that, encouraging that to happen in a more organic way. So your example of the grocery store was perfect, because we all know how much grocery stores are needed in urban environments, and yet we kind of stepped in and did something before the community was really able and ready to support it fully. And I'm sure Hearts was just a little bit ahead of its time, and it's certainly still very much needed and will happen, hopefully in the near future. But doing it incrementally is the key to being able to have all those small businesses providing the services that are supported by the community members.
Great. And
can I just add one more thing to that as well, just real quick? And it's something that maybe some of our listeners may not be so aware of. I know one of the things that people talk about when they talk about emerging neighborhoods or downtown revitalization, everyone talks about the grocery store. Everyone talks about, well, why don't we have a grocery store? The profit margins on groceries are extremely small. So in order to, maintain a working grocery store business, you really have to have population density. And that's why we talk about density so much. When we talk about small businesses that maybe don't have the profit margins that, a big box store might, because of course we want small business to support these communities. We have to have a level of density in a small space to be able to support these amenities. So that's one of the reasons we don't just talk about densities for density's sake and for closeness and walkability. We talk about it as a means to sustaining businesses, especially ones like grocery stores that don't have that profit margin.
great. Thanks, Arian. We've got a question here from Wade Biddle. Is technical urbanism the universal option and opportunity for all worldwide communities? Does technical ignore the organic, human, and beauty aspect of placemaking? Who wants that one?
I'll just say real quick. I think it's the ultimate form of human expression of urbanism. You're not talking about building something permanent that was envisioned by a local government. You're talking about most tactical urbanism starts with community involvement and great ideas. But Maria could probably answer that much better than I can.
Thanks, Arian. Yeah, and I know that there's some confusion as to the terminology. Some people are saying technical urbanism, and I think what we're meaning is tactical urbanism. So Tactical urbanism, I agree with you, Erin, is a way for us to be able to take some of those identified community needs and put a test pilot in place. Figure out, you know, if we want this kind of environment, what can we do temporarily to see how it will work? Figure out the kinks. Oftentimes, tactical urbanism has been done by community members without permission, as a response to the lack of attention that a neighborhood might be getting. So we've seen places where people have gone out and striped side streets or bike lanes and done all kinds of things to take charge of their community and create things where they were feeling that they were being neglected or ignored. So that's, I think, where the terminology comes from. But it can also be a very positive tool in just testing things. When we're proposing a change to a neighborhood, and especially in regards to streets, you know, can we set up something temporarily? It costs a little bit of paint. Can we demonstrate how a dedicated bike lane might work here? Put it up for a few months. And it can be a tool that can be implemented in so many ways that could give so much information to inform potential development. So I think it's often used reactively, but it can be actually a really positive tool for informing future development.
And following up on some questions we had before about the tactical urbanism and kind of marrying that with a COVID response. So how might Rochester consider some areas, specific areas within the city for some sort of incremental tactical urbanism effort? And do you have any ideas about that?
Sure. You know what, one of the things that we're seeing in cities all over the world are that they're taking back roadways and creating places for people to walk because they need to try to accommodate social distancing and the fact that more people are out in order for them to be out in spaces. So this is happening in big cities like Milan and New York, and because of the COVID pandemic, they're able to take this time and kind of repurpose that roadway for a period of time. Currently, it's for the duration of the pandemic. But if we see positive results, it might encourage that change to become permanent. So I see the possibility of doing the same in Rochester, especially since we don't have a tremendous amount of traffic in general. It's a great way to prove that designing to traffic counts isn't maybe the best policy. You know, when we design roadways, we talk about traffic counts, and then we have this induced demand because if we see a road is really busy, we give it more capacity, then it just continues to, you know, the induced demand makes it busy again. So if we can actually take back some roadways and repurpose it for other things temporarily, maybe that can demonstrate the fact that this is doable in a very different way, that we can design streets to encourage the kinds of neighborhoods and environments and experiences that we want to have in urban places, as opposed to just as a connecting place to let cars go by quickly from one point to the next. So that's one place where I'd really love to see some change temporarily that I hope could inspire some permanent change in Rochester.
Great, thank you. From Allison, she says, I don't drive, but find that I don't explore all the neighborhoods I'm interested in because they're beyond a 2-mile walking radius. And public transportation, in her humble opinion, is terrible. Taking Uber is expensive. So there's no question that there's so many wonderful spaces like Shawn's talking about on Clinton Avenue, but don't we have to demand adequate public transportation to get there as a baseline? Who wants that one? Darian?
Go for it, Maria. I think she's got it.
So we know that.
Shawn?
Go ahead.
Shawn? Yeah, I've been on mute this whole time. I was like, these people are ignoring me. There was a couple things I wanted to talk about.
You gotta wave at me.
But I do want to address what Allison just talked about. I think with the transit services reimagined transit program, they were really looking at how to get to the people so that they can actually have a mode of transportation in a time frame that works for them in the city of Rochester. One of the things that Bill actually talked about, which I think was important, was understanding that people going to hospitals and medical facilities and such. That they started, and now they're working with these medical agencies and services to actually get the buses in front of where they are. It was, he gave an example where they built a health facility a mile away from the bus stop, and then said, "Hey, can you just bring a stop here?" It's like, well, if we would have known if we were a part of your discussion when you were going to build, we could have worked a route around where you were actually getting your patients to come in, because this, he talked about the hassle of actually transportation when you're riding the public system. You have to leave work. You have to then go pick up your child from school, find that other bus, get on that bus, go to this said appointment. If they're behind on time, you may have to leave because you've got to get your child back to school and you've got to get back to work on a certain time. So I know that when working with these systems, they're really trying to find ways that do accommodate the people and not necessarily just the businesses, but how do people function and how their flow works. So give it some time. I'll say give it some time. No public transportation is perfect. Give it some time. They actually are trying to work some of those kinks out. And with the Interloop North eventual fill, that'll give us some cross movement as well, where folks can actually get picked up going, I'm terrible with directions, east and west. Sometimes that's hard to do in certain parts of the city. So they're actually looking at that so we can get a streamline to people directly to places instead of having to stop at a transit center, just direct route to the shopping and various other things that you need. So that's just stuff that I know was coming down the pipeline. But anyone else want to chime and jump in on that? Feel free.
I was just going to observe that, you know, there are a lot of concerns about how people get engaged in that community engagement process. And I think what RTS went through was an opportunity for people to get engaged. Do you think that they did it effectively? Were they able to reach into the communities and have the people that are actually using the transportation part of the discussion?
From my understanding, I would say they try. Everyone tries your best. I mean, you can't get to everyone, and but I know they did try. I know they actually were talking to people at the transit station themselves, talking to businesses, corporations, to actually really figure out how, and once again, health systems, how do we transport people in an effective way to the locations they need to get to. And I know they did do their best to actually try and make things happen. So I have to applaud them for that. I also want to jump back to something. I want to talk about, you talking about tactical urbanism. I think, you know, it's everybody loves a big development. And maybe we don't love a big development because it takes so much time for us to see it. You know, once you, when Arian showed this example of Columbus and what they did in their center city, you know, it takes years for that to happen. And people really do enjoy the incremental, the small things, you know. Oh, that trash can is nice. Or they picked up the trash. Oh, that's a pretty tree. Let's sit on that bench. So tactical urbanism really gets down to the level of people and gives you what you really are going to experience. You know what I mean? When you go to a restaurant or whatever place you eat, sometimes you look at the structure, but it's really about the food on your plate that you're there for. So it's the small things that are really going to affect you and shape your world. As I saw somebody mention something, I think about Buffalo or something on one of the chats that came up. And when Buffalo worked on Canal Side, when I was part of Rock the Riverway Advisory Committee, we met with their folks who helped to kick that off the ground. And they were doing their big you know, big reveals and big things, and nobody was still coming to Canal Side until a $60 fix brought people out. It was literally just buying $60. Or rather a $60 Adirondack chair. They bought a bunch of them, tossed them out there. Simple as it was, it brought people out because you may have a draw that you think everyone's going to come to, but heck, there's no place to sit. So why am I going? So it was a simple incremental thing that actually tipped it, and they said, oh, maybe we should actually start listening to the people. And that's when they started to understand there's different ways of actually pulling off community development when you actually consider the people and listen to them and do the small things that people are going to see. People are going to see that there's flowers, that there's not poop on the ground, that it's clean. Those are the small things that people are really going to see in their places that affect them. You just said that, Rock. Hey, Tammy, what up?
Okay. Want to return to density and our COVID-19 pandemic. And you know, they're looking for some guidance on, you know, we know density is what builds urban cores and provides the people to support the businesses. But then again, more density puts people closer together, harder to keep 6 feet apart, takes away some of the open space where we might need to move about. Knowing that we are in the middle of a pandemic and that we may have some in the future, how do you determine what's that tipping point of density and when is it too much? And then how does that affect kind of the basic principles of urbanism? Are we rethinking that in light of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think, you know, no matter how dense or not dense a city is, I think, you know, design is going to be a huge piece of it. You know, we really have what I like to call an approachable density here in Rochester, such that we have, I think I touched on this a little bit last week. We have, you know, kind of big city feel in some places, but within a couple of miles, you can be, you know, in the middle of nature. You know, I think that, you know, I've said this before, I think our cities like ours are going to be very much in demand in the future. I think people are going to look for that next tier down of urban density. I think a lot of people are saying, well, people aren't going to go to cities. People aren't going to go to cities. Well, people who love city life and who appreciate the good things of an urban life are going to maybe make the decision not to abandon cities altogether, but just look for that next scale down. And that, for a lot of people, I think is going to be a place like Rochester, Buffalo, Syracuse, even Utica, and smaller. You know, I think what Maria, you know, touched on as far as, you know, expanding our sidewalks is for me is huge. Taking road space back, especially in this time where we're going to, in the future, we will have fewer cars in the road, because right now is the testing ground for every single business right now to see how many employees they can keep at home and still function. So you're going to see fewer cars on the roads without a doubt in the coming years. Yes, there's going to be a bounce back, but after that, I think we're going to see just generally fewer cars, and that means less space that we need on our roads. We can repurpose that space for people, for walkability, and create nuance where we didn't have the space to do that before. We can create an attractive, walkable environment that's also functional for people of all socioeconomic statuses, all abilities. And I think it really starts there. It starts with taking space back from cars and giving it back to people.
I just want to, great point. And I think our city, I hope so, maybe I don't hope, but if someone from the city's listening, I want to applaud them, designers and planners and folks. In particular, they've already done this. They know how this can be done. If you think about the public market, years ago, along the side where you have your Flower City bread, Cure, all your things, you know, your restaurants, all your bakeries and everything and such, all that used to be parking lot. My studio used to be where Cure is right now. And you had to fight for a parking spot to get there. But once they realized that this was actually, as you mentioned earlier, Arian, this creates this environment, this culture. So they said, you know what, forget the cars. It's much more valuable to this market to block off these parking lots, put some planters here, put the blocks in front of it so that people can enjoy the space. And that was a great approach to urbanism. That was fantastic. And I just have to applaud them on that. So I think moving forward, they already know that this works. And I think they will actually look at other areas. So let's take, for instance, we take, I don't know, Park Avenue, and we say from Berkeley to X, Y, and Z Street, there would be no on-street parking on either side of the street. So now we have to extend this out so people can actually eat at distance, can actually have a meal at distance. These things need to really start happening and be engaged. And let's look at some areas where other folks are gathered. Like I mentioned earlier, the transit center, it's now barricaded, the sidewalk, which is kind of dangerous for people to walk in. But if we can create some sort of temporary extension of that so that people can still have safe gathering places and not have to walk in the streets, that would be fantastic. And I have to go back once again. I think the city's has already understood the value of space, and the public market was a classic example of saying where they chose the people over the cars.
Great. And I know Maria wants to hop in here too as well.
Yeah, so we bought a new house in the city, and I'm really loving exploring my new neighborhood. But one of the things I see now as I go around my community is I'm in the South Wedge, and I drive along Goodman Street, and there's Highland Diner. And there's just this vast vacant parking lot. on a prominent corner. And I wonder, wouldn't it be cool if that was all just a bunch of tables with umbrellas instead of a parking lot? And could we create these spaces to help our small businesses and our restaurants survive? Can we reclaim sidewalk space? Can we reclaim parking spaces near those restaurants, or a parking lot that's adjacent to a building, and just make that an outdoor space that would facilitate the social distancing that's required, the open air atmosphere that could be very much enjoyed. So that's just one aspect of it. But you know, looking at spaces differently and understanding that there could be other uses that would be better benefit the community is a tremendous first step. And that's an opportunity that's being provided to us right now. So I can't wait to explore that further.
And one more thing I'd like to add to that is, you know, the other side of this whole conversation about taking space back, it's sometimes very difficult. You know, I think we're having a conversation here like every small business is on the same page as far as, you know, more public space, giving space back to the people, taking away from cars is universally a good thing. This is a very difficult conversation to have a lot of times with specifically small business owners, because small business owners, and understandably so, because it's kind of the culture we've built in the last 100 years of a car-dominated America. The narrative is the amount of cars that are on the road equals the success of my business. And I think it's really, really important to show other examples of where it's worked, where we've removed space for cars, given it back to people. And this is, believe me, this happens. It's hard to imagine, but this is what actually happens when you give space back to people. Small business growth actually increases. But again, that's a hard sell, and it's something that you have to come to the table with when you're trying to make this happen, whether from a tactical, you know, temporary situation or a permanent one. You have to show these businesses that this does work, and that this will ultimately be a positive thing for their business as well.
And might that not segue into talking about some sort of urban circulator? You know, I've visited quite a few cities where there's, within a certain very inner ring of a city, you'll have a circulator, either some sort of light rail or bus that is available for people to get to the restaurants and to get to the shopping areas easily and leave their car somewhere on the perimeter. Does anybody want to talk about how that's been done elsewhere? Okay, Arian.
I think I've seen it work and not work. It's something that can either be very positive. I mean, it's always positive in concept, right? You park your car and you can go to all the great places, you know, in a city. You know, but I find more often than not, more meaningful transportation that works for everybody, that gets you to where you need to go. If you're a tourist, if you're dependent on public transportation, finding that blend within your already existing bus or rail network is most important. A circulator is one of those places that you have to get right real well, or else it turns into like you know, the one in Detroit there, you know, that has like 900 ridership a day and loses an insane amount of money every year. So while a circulator can work like that, I think it has to be done just right. It has to be marketed effectively. You know, it really has to take into account demographics and how many people really are wanting to do this. You know, I think we have data now that we didn't used to when we designed something like this. So it's something that has to can work, but has to be approached very carefully.
Maria.
Yeah, I agree with you, Arian. One of the things that I kind of like to talk about is the terminology. So when you talk about a circulator, you often think of something that goes around in a circle. And I like to refer to it as something like the T. The downtown needs a T. And it needs something that connects the north and the south, something that goes from at least Cornhill through High Falls, and something that connects east and west, perhaps on Main Street. And that would allow people the connectivity that they need to be able to get out of their office at lunch and go to, say, Cornhill for lunch. A 5-minute ride that they can pick up any time along the street, or go to High Falls. So I like to use the idea of a T as opposed to a circulator. The other thing is that you're right, Arian. We've often looked at what these circulators should do, and I know sometimes it's been discussed that perhaps we should have a circulator that connects the parking garages downtown. Well, the parking garages don't need to be connected. People need to be connected. Places need to be connected. So understanding what the purpose of that transportation mode is and needs to be is critically important. It seems like it's easy to just look on a map and say, well, if we go here, 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 and just kind of splatter the city, it should work. But in reality, there are places that generate interest and places that people want to go, and we can be very intentional about connecting those places, and that's one step in making them more successful. So I do believe a circulator would be another added layer into our current transportation systems and networks that need to be explored. But again, as a system, as one part of a larger network. And getting back to the person who is talking about places being beyond walkability, that's why these other modes of transportation are so great. This is why having a bicycle can increase the distance that you can explore very easily. And although bike lanes may not be needed in neighborhood streets, it's certainly needed on some of our medium-sized thoroughfares in the city. So having protected bike lanes is critically important to allowing people the ability to get anywhere they want to go. If they want to do it on a bike, if they want to do it on a skateboard or a scooter, or there's many, many options. And the more options we have, the more freedom we have. So hopefully we can do that a little bit more.
Shawn?
Really thinking about we're talking post-COVID. I'm really thinking, how do we support in this design? And we're thinking, distance. I think that distance and opening spaces and wider sidewalks would actually benefit a lot of people. And I'm looking at, and I'm thinking directly about some of our disabled individuals who are in wheelchairs or motorized wheelchairs. Every winter, I'm helping out at least 10 or 12 people get around because they're forced into the streets and can't move on the sidewalk safely. So in moving forward and thinking about distance, let's think about those individuals who have to make it on the streets and who are not capable or able of riding a bike in ways that they can have access to public transportation and have access to sidewalks that are wide enough to be plowed, and so that they can feel safe. I think that's a thing to think about is distance. We're thinking about, as we think about design, we're thinking about businesses, but we also have to think about those folks. They also support those businesses and want to be able to support them. So we have to think about how they're getting to the grocery store, how they're getting to a restaurant. So I think that should always be at the table when discussing development of our streets. I'm done.
That connectivity, walkability, all important parts of placemaking that we need to look at wherever we're developing new property, right?
And looking at seasonal, how does this work seasonally? How do we use our environments, throughout the years, when it's raining, when it's snowing? A lot of times we think of people gathering or coming together and socializing in the summer, but there's a lot going on in our winter months, and we really need to think about our design. There can be beauty in these cold and dark moments, and how do we actually put that in place so that there is always some light at the end of the dark tunnel? That's what I want to say.
And I live downtown and I walk a lot of places, and want to just to echo the importance of keeping the sidewalks clear and safe. I can't tell you how many times I tumbled this winter on the streets and on our sidewalks, and I'm much more physically able than a lot of the people that are using those same spaces. So I think if there are people in the city listening to this, that's something that we hear routinely on every program that we do, is that starting to pay attention to how we make our sidewalks wider, more accessible, and more usable is something that we should always consider as we're designing our new spaces and revising the ones we have.
I love the point you made, Shawn, about weather, because we have weather here. We have it every year. We always talk about winter and the difficulties of managing the sidewalks and keeping them clean and clear of snow. And yet, this is a condition that we predict and know is going to happen every year. So if we can put some effort into solving this problem once, we will solve it forever. I mean, it's not like by not doing anything about it, things are going to change. So obviously we have to design for the climate that we have, and we have to understand very clearly that it's something that needs to be a priority. But the other thing that we often disregard is the fact that the weather isn't always so bad. I mean, my mom is an elderly person who lives on East Avenue, and for a long time she chose not to have a car. She put herself in a neighborhood where she could walk everywhere, and she lived here year round. And as much as she might look out the window and say, not too sure I want to go out, usually because of need, she had to bundle up and she went out, and it was always better than she expected. And it was the excuse that she needed to get out. And someone like Kim, you walk around all the time. So oftentimes I think we use the weather as an excuse, but it's really not that bad. You know, through the winter, we have many, many wonderful days. Most days are fairly manageable if the conditions were appropriate, if we had cleared sidewalks, if we had dedicated clean bike lanes. I think a lot of people would be able to use those more readily. So that certainly, the weather certainly should not be an excuse. Anytime that somebody brings that up here, I talk about, you know, in the street in Toronto, you're going to see a huge gathering of people in the middle of winter in the dark of night. Why is it? They have the same weather that we do. So weather should never be an excuse for the way we create space.
That's a great point, Maria. All right, are we ready to move on to the next one? Okay, I don't see anybody waving at me. Sorry that I missed you before. All right. We had a couple questions from our original program, kind of based on political will and what it really takes to make some of this placemaking happen. Dorothy's question was, how will we get the city of Rochester to allow affordable tiny houses, cooperative housing on a greater scale, and not just remove housing to give away to properties that suck up tax dollars and are largely for higher income renters? And from Sandy, what role does political will play in preventing the filling in of our environment with buildings and creating a transportation system that doesn't meet the needs of the community? So a lot rolled into that question, and I'm going to let you guys unpack it in pieces that you want to bite into. So who wants to go first?
Sure, I will.
Maria.
So I think, you know, certainly we look to our civic leadership to be innovative and be forward thinking, but it's really their role to be responsive to the community. So this is one of the reasons we feel it's important to give our community members the tools that they need to understand the language of design, to understand the strategies, and then the more they can advocate for the kind of places they want, then they can take this to the municipality, and the municipality would need to be responsive. So, you know, regarding the business owners, as Ariane said, it's really hard to convince a business owner that they can do without their parking. But if we had a whole population of people who decided that they were willing to make that sacrifice and to go to businesses by foot and not and leave that parking space available for other and better uses, then that business owner could be more willing to take those chances. And municipalities are the same way. If they see a huge trend and people are willing to support that trend, then the municipality will follow that community's initiative. So hopefully we can change that dynamic a little bit and understand that we as people have the power to advocate for and hopefully drive decision-making.
Sounds good. Ariane?
I just want to reiterate really something Maria said that I think is so important. I just wrote a piece on this, or a podcast on this rather, and give people the language. A lot of times we go into a space, we walk into an environment, and we don't know, we like it, but we don't know how to articulate why. And, you know, some of our greatest spaces, but before I knew this language, you know, just a decade ago, before I knew how to express why I walk into a space and really enjoy and appreciate it, I didn't know how to articulate that. So I didn't know how to move on it politically. I didn't know how to talk to a politician about, hey, I like the space, I don't know why, so why can't we have more of it? When you give people the language, it empowers them to be able to go to their local leaders and elect their local leaders, and talk about these things and give them, empower them to be able to talk about these things in a way that is empowering, that is functional and changing of an environment. Once you give people the language and tell them why they're feeling good about this place that they really love, then they can they're empowered to go to their leader, their local leaders, and hopefully make that happen.
I just want to chime in here. Thank you both, and thank you, Aaron, for saying that. That's exactly what Hinge Neighbors is about. It's about how do you connect, how do you inform, and how do you educate so that when folks come to the table, they have the language, they understand what's happening, and they know what's going on. They're well informed, and that does lead to great place. And I've thought about this. This is on a whole nother subject, and we're looking at political will, process things to happen. And everyone talks about our great failures here in town. We can always point to things, Fast Ferry. We can talk about Brown's race, anything like that. But we also, as people, we can't be afraid to fail. It doesn't come out right all the first time. And you have to allow those people that you've put into place, and you speak to them and allow them to fail. If we're not failing, we're not trying. If we're not trying to create a new connection between ourselves and Toronto, we just want to be stuck. If we're not trying to redevelop our waterways and our waterfront, like with Rock the Riverway, everything may not come out perfect. It's not going to come out perfect. But I think we have to understand that those leaders and those powers that be have to be willing and know that the support of the people know that there are going to be some great failures in trying to create a great city, and be willing to accept that and not accept it, but understand that and be willing to work together to say, all right, that didn't work out too well. What did we learn from it? How can we move forward? Someone mentioned earlier, and when I saw the chats there, somebody mentioned, Brown's race. Originally, he asked to go there and hang out at the bars and party and do all the fun things. Then they're like, it didn't happen, Jillian's, all these things is gone. But what it did do is it brought attention to High Falls. It took some time. And there's actually housing down there. There are people living from different economic stratas that are living down there. There's an educational center down there. So it didn't become the hub of entertainment, but it became a new neighborhood that could support people in different avenues and venues. So it worked out well. New businesses, stores popped up to actually accommodate the students, to accommodate those people that are living in the neighborhood. So there are a lot of changes that have happened in the positive, even though we don't have a bumping bar scene down at High Falls. But be very aware that it's okay to fail, and in trying to create great places, you're going to have great failures.
Thanks, Shawn. I just want to, we're coming up on the end of our program today, but I wanted to share a message that came in from Valeria Lorenzelli, who is an Italian placemaker that attended our webinar last week. And yes, we had people from Kansas City and from Italy, but she says, I'm an Italian placemaker in Italy, one of the few people that work with placemaking. What are the elements typical of the US philosophy and mentality that determine your results? I think the temporary actions and the pragmatism are your strengths. What do you think about that? So that might be, and when I think about Italy, I say they've got placemaking down, right? You think of all the plazas and all the intimate streets and all the out there stuff. So it's interesting that she's looking to us for guidance, but who wants to respond to that one?
I'll take it. Yeah, it's really interesting that we've devised this whole new term that we call new urbanism, and all it is really going back in history to how cities were organically formed. And so placemaking is kind of this new concept, really, that's based on the same thing, the way people originally created space. And what made all those old spaces so successful is they were pre-cars. They were created by people at their scale to accommodate their needs. And so that's why in the presentation last week, I showed that street that was, before cars, and you saw the vibrancy and the excitement on the street. And so this kind of newly discovered concept that we need to bring people back to the center of things is really an old idea that we have proven success with, as you see in so many cities around the world. And it's been kind of this fascination, our American fascination, and now, of course, a worldwide fascination, love affair with the car, that's really changed our places so dramatically to the point that our places have become almost harmful to us, unhealthy for us. So, you know, returning back to the way places were is terrific. We do, I think, in the States have the opportunity to be innovative and do all of these little trials. But we do also often look at Europe for a lot of models, because they do seem to be leading the way with reclaiming some of those spaces that we hope to do the same here. So thank you for listening in. It's great to know that we had such a great reach. Go ahead, Arian.
No, I just say real quick, because I know we're up against it. You know, I think it's the Europe, and I'm going to say a lot of Europe and the US have two different mindsets about mobility, about how we move about. Our culture, we've built ours on an individualistic form of transportation, where much of Europe has retained much more of their public transportation, high-speed rail. My wife and I spent last summer on our honeymoon in Scotland, and the number of trains that were leaving cities far smaller than Rochester, like 42 departures a day in a city of 60,000, was unbelievable. You could literally go anywhere. And when you have that connectivity, you know, that's the thing that saves the space of roadways and allows you to repurpose it in other ways. That's something that Europe has done far better than us. And if we want to, as Maria said, kind of get back to what we had, it's going to look at, you know, how we move about and taking some of that space back from the automobile. It's so important.
Thanks, Arian, and thanks all three of you for continuing this conversation. We hope those of you that are listening, we have several of you, it looks like we've got about 30 people together with us today. We appreciate your comments and your questions, and I'm going to ask you if you would like to put any additional comments into the chat box so that you can give us feedback about this format and how we're going to move forward doing this again. That would be much appreciated. And I'm going to toss it to Maria to just wrap everything up.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We are really pleased to have this collaboration with C4, and we will look forward to continuing that collaboration and also working with some of the other organizations around our city that are working to make great things happen. So special thanks to Kim for being our moderator. Thanks to our fellow presenters, Arian and Shawn. And behind the scenes, Monica with the CDCR staff, and Suzanne Mayer helped us last week. So thanks so much. We have to thank all of our sponsors at the Community Design Center. They really are critical to helping us do the work that we do in the community. So we want to acknowledge them. And I'd also like to just put in a plug for our next presentation. May 20th, Jason Haremza and Molly Gaudioso are going to have a presentation entitled Behind the Curtain, how to engage in the land use process. And we've had some questions about this, and this is a great presentation. Again, it's kind of a 101 presentation on what are the various roles that the departments of the municipality play, so that people have a better understanding when they have an issue. Who should they go to? What are the resources that might be available? So please join us May 20th. We'll be promoting that later this week. And please give us your feedback through the survey or directly to any one of us. We really need to hear from you so that we can keep making this program better. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Be safe and be well.